forget, I'll just click Zoom record before I move on. Okay, so if you already haven't, and I know a few of you have already, please do say hi in the chat. I want today to be as interactive as possible, so I'll ask a couple of questions as we go along. You can either use that chat function which you have been using, or feel free to unmute your mic and just answer the question out loud. Just before we get going, again, just a bit more of an intro to me. So I'm Pumalo. I'm one of the relationship managers here at Lightful. So I work very closely with a lot of organizations from across the UK and across the world, helping them utilize technology and use digital to better communicate their stories and better showcase the impact with a view of helping them fundraise more through digital tools and technology. So hopefully I'll be able to share some of that knowledge with you over the course of this session this afternoon. A bit of background about me. I've worked in the charity sector for a number of years. Most of that has been in marketing, fundraising, communications. I also had a brief stint at the government where I worked in the strategic communications department. So really focusing on sharing public messages through different digital channels, but also using events and face-to-face and working very close with local governments as well. As I said, I've worked in the non-profit or charity sector for a number of years. And being able to work so closely with so many organizations here at Lightful is something I really, really enjoy. And I get to have loads of conversations with charities that work in different sectors. But what's really important to me is sort of having this, being able to have some sort of social impact on my day to day. And I'm sure you're all the same. Working for the different organizations that you work with. And it's actually a huge pleasure to be kind of talking to you today because I love sport, and obviously with the connection with Sported, it's kind of the meeting of my two passions, so helping and then sport. A real pleasure for me to be kind of sharing some insights and some information with you today. So what we'll cover today, just before I kick off, I've noticed a couple of comments on the slide. Brilliant. Thank you very much, Saba, Stuart, and Haley, for sharing a bit more about your organizations. I hope everyone else can see that, and it's good just so everybody can see and get to know everyone else on the call as well. So it's not just me talking at you. But we've got quite a lot to cover today, so I'll very quickly just take you through our agenda. We've only got an hour, and I want to try and make sure to leave some time for questions at the end. So we'll kick off with sort of looking at some learning objectives. So as I said at the start, what we're hoping to do today is give you some tips and some tools to make your lives a little bit easier when it comes to using social media and communicating through social media, whether that's internally, whether that's with external audiences. But how can you use it and maximize social media for your organizations? So I'll take you through some learning objectives very quickly. I'll then talk to you in a bit more detail about social media strategy. So first of all, introducing the idea of being a bit more strategic with your social media, but what does that actually mean? So we'll unpick that a little bit more, and then I'll take you through the different steps of actually creating your own social media strategy. Before looking at how you actually then measure the success of your strategy. So it's important to create a social media strategy, but how do you know it's working? What can you do to measure whether your strategy is working or not? I'll hopefully give you some advice on that today. And then we'll do a bit of a recap where we look at some key takeaways. And then, as I said, hopefully have some time for questions at the end. Please feel free to stop me and interrupt if at any point anything I'm saying doesn't quite make any sense, or if you just have a question on anything that I bring up. As I said, please feel free to use the chat feature or just unmute your mic and ask a question. But yeah, hopefully we'll have some time for questions at the end. Does that sort of make sense in terms of what we're covering today? Is there anything on there that is surprising, or anything that you would like to cover if we have time? Nope, all good. I'll just keep an eye on the chat in case you do answer me, and then we can hopefully squeeze it in. Okay, so first thing we'll look at then, as I said, is these learning objectives. So what do we want to get out of the session today? First thing I want you to be able to do is to fully understand what a social media strategy is. So I'll hopefully unpick that for you. I know strategy can be a bit of a wishy-washy term, but hopefully we'll put some meaning behind that today so that you go away understanding what a social media strategy is, but most importantly, why it's really, really important for you and your organization. What are the benefits for you and your organization? And then lastly, I'll take you through the steps of actually creating your own social media strategy, creating content, but then importantly, evaluating that strategy and evaluating success. So those are the three main objectives today. And I hope that's kind of what you were hoping to get out of the session as well. But as I said, hopefully you'll have some time for questions. So if there's anything that we don't cover, please don't hesitate to ask at the end. Okay, so answering that question then, what is a social media strategy? So as I mentioned at the start, when I was kind of introducing the topic, social media is this sort of ever-present thing that I'm sure you're all aware of or use to some degree. And in fact, before I get into it, it would be really good to get an understanding to what degree you all use social media. So yes, I'll ask the question and either unmute your mic and just chat out or pop it into the chat box. Who here uses social media for their organization as a way of communicating with either potential donors, potential supporters, or people that actually use your services? Oh, excellent. Yeah. So Stuart said he's looking at linking a social media strategy for crowdfunding purposes without seeming like you're begging. That's a really interesting point, and that's definitely one of the benefits and one of the main uses of social media. So we'll touch on that today. We'll talk a little bit about creating content and storytelling through social media that can hopefully present your message in a way that that doesn't come across as begging. Yes, you all use. Brilliant. Okay, excellent. So it looks like everybody does use social media to some degree then. That's good. That's good. And hopefully, by the end of the session today, we'll understand the benefits of being a little bit more strategic with it, because that's something that we definitely find at Lightful. A lot of the organizations that we work with, there tends to be a lot to unpick with social media. There's all the different channels, all the different potential audiences. So I think taking you through the different steps of actually putting together a strategy that's specific for what you're aiming for will hopefully be of benefit to you today. But it's great to hear that you're all aware and are using social media. So what is a social media strategy then? Can you answer that question? So, I mean, it's self-explanatory in that the social media strategy is basically a summary of what you're planning to do on social media. So how you're hoping to use it as an organization, but laid out. So, what is your objective? What is it that you're hoping to actually achieve? Whether you're just posting daily, whether you're, no matter what the frequency is, what are you hoping to achieve from communicating through social media? Your strategy should encompass that. It basically, it sets up, your strategy also helps set out how you're actually planning to share your content, how you're planning to distribute your content. And when we talk about content, we're basically talking about the posts that you create, whether that's text, pictures, videos, links to your website, that sits under content. So when we use this word, and I'll use this word frequently today, we're just talking about those different types of messaging, your content. So your social media strategy basically helps you set out how you're actually going to share that content across your social media channels with your audience. It gives you a really, really good, and it should give you a framework that helps you actually prioritize your communications. So a lot of the organizations that we work with, as I mentioned, or a lot of people I know that use social media for their organizations don't necessarily have a well thought out plan when it comes to communicating with their audiences. It becomes very reactionary, which is really, really good on social media. And social media gives you a good basis to react to what's happening within your different environments. But it's really, really important to prioritize and plan ahead in terms of what you want to be telling your audience. So it helps you be a bit more proactive with your communications. And jumping into then, why is that useful? So why is that useful for our organizations? Why is it useful when it comes to helping us achieve our objectives, whether that's fundraising, whether it's getting people to sign up for different events? Why is social media useful? And why particularly is a strategy useful? So as I mentioned, and as I alluded to in that last slide, it helps you become more organized. So again, the idea of being less reactionary and more proactive. So it puts you in control of what your communications are. It helps you be more effective. The more you plan ahead, the more you have a better idea of what's going out, when it's going out, you can actually start to be a bit more effective with your time, but also with your messaging. You can spend a little bit more time on that planning stage and think about, what it is that you want to say, why you want to say it, and what you want that piece of communication to achieve, and that will help you be more effective. So strategy should hopefully make you be more effective with your touch points with your organizations. It helps you raise awareness for, as I mentioned, different things that you might be communicating to your audience about, again, whether that's fundraising campaigns, whether that's events that are coming up. It gives you an opportunity to lay that out and plan when you want to speak to your audience about these different events. It helps you make the most of social media. So again, the idea of not just being reactionary, but with a strategy, you can actually unpick the bits of social media that will benefit you most and focus more on those. It helps you again show authenticity. It puts you in control of your messaging, and it'll help you showcase your brand a little bit more. It will help you be a bit more consistent. So having a strategy behind how you communicate through social media will build consistency, build brand awareness, so that people and your audience will get a better idea of what your messaging is. They'll know when they look at their busy feeds, this type of post comes from this organization, because I'm used to seeing these types of posts come from this organization. So the idea of building authenticity, building brand awareness. Again, just touched on that idea of increasing that consistency. Consistency will help with a lot of these points, especially with that idea of being more effective with your communications. So it's not just really, really random when we're deciding to actually put tweets out or post on Facebook. The more strategic we are, the more consistent we'll be. And all in all, it will help you build trusted connections with your audience. So a strategy, one of the main aims of implementing a strategy is this idea of deepening your engagement with your audience, which again, to your point, Stuart, the deeper an engagement you have, the easier it becomes to ask your audience for donations or to participate in something. It feels like when they're more involved, when they're more connected to the work that you do or the communications that you're putting out, it's an easier step for them to then donate, and it becomes a much easier ask for you, so it doesn't seem like you're begging, because they'll have an understanding of where that money is going, what the benefits of their donation will be. So the deeper the connection they have to your organization and the work that you're doing, the better. And having a social media strategy will help you deepen that connection. Just pause to see if we've got. That's a really, really good question, and we'll come to that, Stuart. So Stuart has asked, is there a template example that works well on Facebook, which is different from Instagram? That's a really good question, and I will come to that. But before that, what I'm going to do is take you through the different steps of creating your very own social media strategy. So what I provide to you is going to give you a template that you can then implement depending on the different channels you want to use, depending on your different audience groups. But this is basically a template to help you build your social media strategy. And before I do that, I'll just ask another question. Have any of you at any point tried to implement a social media strategy or a social media plan, if you like, or do you tend to post on social media as and when? Brilliant. So Haley has a plan. That's excellent. As and when, Saba, that's absolutely fine as well. Brilliant, Stuart. Using Hootsuite. Nice. That's an excellent point, Stuart, about fitting it into your overall marketing strategy. And hopefully, again, we'll come to that idea of measuring success. So hopefully you'll be able to take away something from that as well. But good, excellent. Thank you very much for sharing. So, okay, the first thing that we want to do then, it's again a strategy, and the idea of putting a strategy together can sometimes seem really, really washy. So what I want to do is give you some real practical steps that you can take and implement or pick up on. So you might have already done some of these things. So if you have, please bear with me. Hopefully there'll be something that you can pick up and take away. But often we ask ourselves a question when it comes to preparing a strategy. It's like, there's so many things that I need to do. So where do we actually start? Where is the best place to start? And more times than not, the best place to start is with your audience. So understanding your audience, understanding who they are, where you need to actually speak to them, and what they want to hear will help shape the rest of your strategy. So starting point, audience. Understanding your audience. What does that mean then? What do we want to know about our audience members? So first of all, we want to know, which channels they're on, that they're using. So Stuart, to your point about Facebook and Instagram, with social media, there's this is something that we always say at Lightful. There so many social media channels. There's Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, TikTok, and more popping up. But it's really, really important to understand which channels your audience members are using. That will very much inform which channels you as an organization should be using. So there's no point being on TikTok if your audience doesn't use TikTok. There's no point using social media channels just for the sake of using them because they're available. So that goes back to the idea of, being strategic. And again, to your point, so understanding, what, whether or not your audience members are using Instagram, whether or not they're using Facebook. If they're using both, yes, communicate to them on both and spend a bit of time on specifying how you're going to communicate to them on both. But try and get an understanding of which channels your audience are using, what they're using it for, so that you can communicate to them and you can shape your messaging. So the second part of that point is really, really important. What are they using it for? Are they using it are they using Facebook just to scroll through videos? Are they reading information, or do they go to Instagram to read information? Or do they go to Twitter to get updates on news? Trying to get an understanding of what they're actually using those channels. So that's the first point, is which channels are they using and what are they using them for? Have a look at what their conversations are like. That'll give you an idea of what what they like to hear, what they like to see on those different social media channels. When we say conversations, it just means try and get an understanding of what they're engaging with. So I don't necessarily mean, oh, who's speaking to who about what, but which sorts of posts are getting loads of likes, which sorts of posts are getting loads of shares and engagement. So that'll give you a picture on what the general audience wants to interact with, and again, will help shape the type of content that you put out. You need to be really clear on who you want to target. So if it's a donation campaign, if it's people that you want to sign up for something, who are you targeting? Is it donors? Is it actually beneficiaries that you're targeting? Have a clear picture in your mind who you're targeting. We'll talk a little bit about building personas in a second, but this idea of having almost look-alike, having a really detailed understanding of that your ideal and your target audience members is really, really important, because once you get that picture in your head, you'll know, again, what type of content they want to interact with and what channels they want to use. So be really clear in your head of who you actually want to target. And then think about different ways you can learn about these supporters. So if you've got relationships with current either supporters, supporters or just audience members, ask them those questions. So ask them which channels they're using, what type of content they like. Is it videos? Is it pictures? Do they like infographics? Do they like loads of statistics? Do they like in-depth articles? Ask them what type of communications they like, and through which channel. So have that conversation with them. That's something that you might want to do with your engaged supporters, because they're more likely to be honest and to tell you and give you those insights. But then the important thing, once you've got those insights, is to change the way you're operating. So don't just say, don't speak to your audience and let them tell you, oh no, we don't actually use Facebook, and then continue to push messaging through Facebook. Have that open conversation with them. It's a really good way of helping understand and learn what your audience are actually doing and what their habits are. And then lastly, what does your message say to your supporters? So think about what the content you're putting out is saying about your organization. What is it saying about your brand? That's really, really important. More and more, we've seen organizations taking a stand, and that's a political stand, that is. And that comes from big brands like Nike, right the way to small community organizations, and that's a reflection of the way different people are interacting with content, whether that's on social media or news articles, whatever. So be really, really clear what it is that you want to say about your organization. do you want to take a stand politically? Do you want to toe the line, or do you not even want to enter that realm? Make sure you incorporate that in your strategy, and make sure that that's really clear when you're communicating with your audience. And then think about, again, why someone should follow you. So again, put yourself in the shoes of your audience and think to yourself, what are we doing that's different to other organizations? Why is it worth their time following us? That's a really, really critical, important question to ask, but it can be really, really helpful in unpicking and helping spark some ideas. So what are you doing differently? What's different to the information that you're sharing through social media that should encourage people to follow you? I'm just going to pause because I've got a question. Stuart's just asking, is there a resource to find which demographic uses what? So there are a few resources, and I could share. In fact, I will share some with you. But a good place to start, actually, if you're active on Facebook, if you've got a Facebook page, through Facebook's analytics, you can get some really, really good insight into demographics, which gives you an idea, obviously, of the interactions with Facebook itself, but it gives you a really good idea of what type of content different demographics are interacting with. But I'll make sure I'll share some information about demographics and channels with you. But even saying that, it's always shifting. So usually it tends to be the younger audience members are on the more visual social media platforms like TikTok, like Snapchat, like Instagram, and the older demographics tend to use things like Twitter. Instagram is gaining popularity with older generations, and Twitter. So things that are a little bit more text heavy, things that are a bit more news orientated. But I'll share some statistics with you. It's often quite surprising as well. Jumping forward, then I mentioned personas, and I can share more information with you on personas, but an idea that really helps put you in the shoes of your audience is this idea of building personas. A persona is basically to explain what it is, a persona is basically an avatar or a made up, a fictional representation of your audience. So it's a good idea to have multiple personas, and it's people that interact, or you want to interact with your organization to any degree. There are two types of personas. So you can have the main persona, which are the people that currently engage with your audience. So it might be that you've got a persona that represents your beneficiaries. It might be that you've got a persona that represents your volunteers. It might be one that represents your staff members. So it's anybody that interacts, a fictional character that you give a name to, that you build as an organization, that represent the different audience groups that interact with your organization. So we've got the main persona, and then there's also the ideal persona. So these are the people that you want to target. So these potentially could be potential donors, potential beneficiaries, and potential volunteers. So anybody that you want to target. And that's who's represented in the ideal persona. And as I say, it's a really useful exercise to do, just to actually sit down as a team. Usually try and get as many people that have different audience touch points within your organization, and get them thinking about, who are your typical audience members. So again, looking at those different groups I mentioned, whether it's volunteers, donors, beneficiaries, what do those people actually look like? What do their lives look like? And that'll give you an idea of the differences between those audience groups. So it might be that one of your personas, as I say, is a volunteer, and it's what we usually encourage organizations to do is to actually name these personas, so it makes it feel a little bit more realistic. And again, it's just part of the exercise of putting yourself in the shoes of your different audience members. So it might be that they're a volunteer, there might be a young student who you're trying to get to sign up for an event or a petition, and then putting yourself into their shoes will help structure how you speak to them. So you'll speak to these that there'll be subtle differences, but really, really important differences that will help you structure your messaging so it's most effective with the different audience groups. And again, I can share more information about personas with you. But just out of interest, is this something that you've come across before? Is this something that you've thought about doing, actually building audience personas before? I've just given away what's in my next slide slightly. I'll jump across then. So, right, we've looked at our audience. The next step then, once we've got a better understanding of our audience and the different channels that they use and what they want to hear from us, the next step is to then set your objectives. And this sounds relatively easy, but it's worth reiterating. So what should our objectives cover? Essentially, they're just an outline of what it is you want to achieve through your communications and social media. So what are you hoping to get out of social media? They should also cover, how you're actually going to reach your objectives. So don't just say this is what we want to achieve. Be really clear on how you're actually going to achieve that. And then think about how you can make them more actionable and how you can be accountable with your objectives. So how can you deliver more impact? It's really, really important to think about when setting out your objectives. Has anybody used the SMART goals framework before? The SMART goals framework basically helps you be a little bit more strategic with how you're setting your objectives. SMART is just an acronym which stands for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-based. So it's the idea of, again, being more accountable with your objectives that we set. So it's not about just saying this is what we want to achieve. It's answering those other questions as well. So how are you actually going to achieve it? How are you going to know when you've achieved it? And how do you know when you've actually achieved it? And how are you measuring that success? So that's basically a very quick summary of the SMART goals framework. Think about using that. And I'm just trying to think of a really good example of a SMART goal that I can share with you. So instead of, as opposed to saying something like, we're going to, our objective or our aim with a social media campaign is to increase our followers on Twitter. That's really, really vague. It doesn't actually give us much to aim for, and we can actually slip off if we're not specific with what it is that we're trying to achieve. So a better way of framing that might be, we're going to increase our Twitter followers by 20% by scheduling 17 posts over the next 2 weeks. So can you tell the difference between those two posts already, those two objectives already? So in the second one, we've got an actual numbered target that we can measure success by. So 20%. We've got time, so we've got the next 2 weeks, and we've got some insight into how we're actually planning to achieve that 20%. So what are we doing to achieve that 20%? We're scheduling posts over the next 2 weeks and being a bit more strategic with it. So that's how you might use the SMART goal framework. And again, I can share a bit more information with you on that and how to actually build SMART goals. Yes, it's great to see a few people have already um, tried using the SMART goal framework, and this works outside of social media as well. As you mentioned, Stuart, it's a vital part of the wider marketing strategy as well. Once we've set our objectives, our SMART objectives, it's time to start planning then. So what do you need to plan as part of your social media strategy? Again, that all important channels. So deciding on which channels you're going to use to communicate with your audience. Is it just Facebook? Is it the whole shebang? Is it Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok? Deciding which channels you're going to use, the frequency of posting, which is really, really important, and it varies across channels. So it's really important to understand the different frequencies of each channel. And then what you're actually planning for. Is it a campaign? Is it fundraising? So think about, what you're actually planning for. And then think about, who needs to be involved. So do you need to alert volunteers? Do you need to alert your beneficiaries? Do you need to alert anybody internally that needs to be involved in your planning? Who's going to help you put your photographs together? Who's going to help you put your imagery? Who's going to write the copy? All that should go into the planning. And then who will need buy-in? That's a really, really important one. If you're thinking about potentially investing money, whether that's through creating videos, content, and even time, it doesn't necessarily have to be money. Think about who you need to influence that needs to buy in to your social media strategy or your plan for it to be successful. So just to reiterate then, what do we need to plan? We need resources. We need to organize, whether that's existing content, whether that's new. We need to find the tools that we're going to actually deliver through. And then we need to decide what visual content we'll need to actually create. We need to set our goals. So again, what are we trying to achieve? What does success look like? And then how are we going to actually measure that success? And then we need to obviously plan our time, how much time we need. And again, that idea of the frequency of posting, and then the team behind it. So who you need to be involved. So those are all things to think about during that planning phase of developing our strategies. After that, then we start to look at our content. So we're getting closer and closer to developing our content. So what does that look like? What do we need to think about when creating content? So your social media strategy should include really, the social media channels that we've mentioned, the key dates, awareness days, possible campaign ideas. What it shouldn't include when it comes to creating your content is the idea of a content calendar, detailed plan. So your social media strategy at this stage should just be top line. You should touch on, what it is you're trying to achieve, but don't dive into too much detail on, in terms of actually pulling together the content calendar and the detailed plans of what each post is going to look like. So focus on that top line idea when it comes to creating content. So how a few things to help you to think about then when you're actually planning your content. Again, channels, really, really important. Those key dates that you can focus your content around. So are there any events, awareness days, fundraising opportunities coming up that you want to speak to your audience about? Tie back into your personas, what is happening in the lives of your target audience and your main audience. What can you talk about? What can you include in your content? What insight do you know about your different audience groups? Sorry, just jumping forward. So those are the top line things that you actually need to start thinking about when planning out your content. And then once you've planned out that content, you can actually start to get a little bit bit deeper into creating your content. So if you know you've got a fundraising campaign, you need to start then thinking about, your ask, the timelines of when you want to put that ask, how you can build up momentum, how you can engage your audience before actually putting that ask in front of them, before saying, please donate. Do you need to create a separate donation page? Do you need to create any new materials? That's when you can start diving into what that content actually looks and feels like. But at this stage, when we're putting our strategy together, all we need is this top line view. So which channels we're using, what are the key dates that we can potentially talk about, and who are we actually targeting, and what do we know about that audience that we're targeting. And then lastly, the last step of actually putting your strategy together, we want to look at metrics or measuring success. So I've thought it might just be useful for me to lay out some different social media metrics that you can use to measure success of social media campaigns in particular. So firstly, we look at reach. So the number of people that we're actually reaching with the content that we're putting out in social media, the number of new followers that brings. You want to think about measuring reach per channel. That'll give you an idea of which channels you're more successful on. And then you want to look at reach per content type. So are we getting a larger reach with videos? Are more people interacting with our videos than are with our pictures, or just the text heavy content? So think about reach, and then the different things that you can measure below reach. Engagement. So engagement is basically defined as, people taking an action off the back of seeing your content. So things like likes, comments, shares, reactions, mentions. And again, you can do this based on the different channels. You can do it based on different content types, and that'll give you a better understanding of what type of content people want to interact with. Traffic is a really, really good one. So again, if we've got, if we're setting up a website page that we're trying to drive people through, looking at the number of people that are clicking the link to that website, and understanding which content and which posts are driving more clicks through to that website. So traffic is something that is really, really useful to look at and measure in terms of understanding how successful your social media strategies are. And the last one is donation. So if you're putting an ask in front of your audience, and it doesn't necessarily have to be monetary, it could be that you're asking them to sign up for something, or asking them to share something, whatever that ask is, trying to keep a track of the number of people that do that eventual ask, your call to action. People that actually do that will give you an overall understanding of how well your social media strategy has worked and how it has performed. So there's some top line metrics that you want to look at when measuring the success of your social media strategies. Excellent. So sorry, I'm going at a rate of knots here, but just to recap before breaking up into, or opening up into some questions. Some key takeaways then. So again, the first thing to understand really and to take away is, social media is one of the most useful communication tools out there. There's a lot of negativity, growing negativity that's attached with using social media, but we have to remember that, as nonprofits, as organizations that are doing some social good, it's our responsibility to continue to use social media to convey the good that we do. And people want to interact with what we're doing. So how can we, understanding how we can utilize social media, ignore the noise that's out there, but how we can utilize it to spread positivity. So, and social media is a really powerful tool in terms of helping do that. As long as we do it correctly, as long as we use, we're a bit more strategic, we can be really, really successful in helping spread positivity through social media. First thing that you want to do, as we said, is start by you looking at your audience. Look, understand, what it is that you want them to get out of your communications. What's the action that you want to take? Understand which channels there are. The more you understand about your audience, the better your interactions will be with them. The more you can tailor your communications to what they want to see. Um, be specific again, that idea of tailoring content for your audience. So again, the more you understand, the more you can create bespoke, personalized content, which is sometimes hard to do on social media because you've got so many different audience groups seeing one profile. But the more you understand what those different audience groups, there'll be some similarities that you can use to shape the content that you create, and again, the more meaningful interactions they'll have with your organization. Plan ahead, plan as much as you can ahead. So the more you put into planning, the more you'll get out of your social media strategies. So it's that idea, as I mentioned at the start, of being a little bit more proactive and less reactionary. It's always good to be reactionary on social media. It's part of one of the benefits actually of social media. It's this live, ongoing conversation that we can have with our audience groups. But be proactive. Put your messaging out there first, and then you control the narrative of your organization. And then tied into that, be social. So one of the great things about social media is the fact that it allows us to have these quite far relationships with people that we don't necessarily interact with on a daily basis. It helps us reach new audiences, wide audiences. So it's really important when people engage with your content, with what you're putting out. It's really, really important to react and be social and start conversations with people. The more conversations, the more engaging you are, the more people will engage with your audience, with your content. And lastly, focus on quality, not quantity. A mistake a lot of organizations make is thinking that they have to be, spread really, really far wide across loads of different channels and posting constantly. But in fact, a lot of the social media channels are actually getting wise to that and penalizing posts and organizations for cluttering news feeds, it's called, for cluttering feeds. Facebook in particular and Instagram will punish you. Their algorithms are built to punish you for constantly putting out content that's not getting that many engagements. So focus on how you can put fewer posts out there, but increase the engagements of those few posts. So that idea of quality, not quantity, will always help increase your engagements. And that's all I had. We've got sort of 5 minutes or so for questions, and there are a few resources that I promised I would share as well. So I'll make sure I send them to you at when I share the recording and the slides of this session. But yeah, just in these last 5 minutes or so, are there any questions or anything that you would add or any takeaways? Really good question. So where would we suggest you get direct support with social media strategy and implementation? That's it's a tough one because it's I guess an internal resource question. And I would always say it is worth having somebody, or at least part of someone's role looking after social media because as I mentioned, the more you put into it, the more you get out of it, the more you get to plan. I think volunteers is actually a really good, if you're low on budget, putting a call out to your volunteers is a real or even if they're employees, but trying to find people within your network who have got those skills, who are potentially wanting to develop those skills, giving them an opportunity and setting it as sort of a project and saying, this is what we want to achieve. We're not doing it currently with our social media. Is this something that you would like to work on? I think that's a very good place to start. Failing that, and if you do have a bit of budget, potentially looking at hiring, digital marketing students, social media marketing specialists. Varying levels will cost the organization varying degrees, but yeah, it's definitely started with volunteers. Haley has got a question saying, when paying to promote posts, how do we know whether to direct people to our profile website or direct message? What's the different benefits? So again, Haley, that will depend on what your overall objective is. What I would always suggest is you want to put, if it's for a donation ask, for instance, you want to put as few barriers in front of those people to doing that as possible. So as few steps to getting to that donation page as possible. So if you're paying to promote a donation page or a sign up page, direct people to that page. Don't ask them to go to your messages and then you have you direct them, because again, that's the time that might take for you to actually see that message and reply, direct them to the right place. So try and have static places where they can get the information that they need, and then always give them the option of where they can find out more. But especially with things like sign up campaigns or donation campaigns, whether it's for events or whatever the purpose, think about putting less barriers in front of our audience, especially if you're spending money on getting them to do that action. You want to put as few barriers as possible in front of them. Unless, of course, your objective is to try and get people to interact with you in some way, then you would direct them to your chat box or your direct messages. Yeah, think about what the objective of your campaign or what you're trying to achieve by actually paying or promoting posts to audience members. What's the action that you want them to take, and think about the barriers between them seeing that post and them taking that action. And I'm just scrolling up just to see if we had any questions. And sure, yeah, sorry, just going back to your question about, I hope I kind of answered it, but not in great detail, but on Facebook and Instagram as an example of, strategies that might work for each one. Again, it goes back to understanding your audience, but a lot of it will come to do with getting a deeper understanding of each channel. So Instagram tends to be a bit more visual, so less text. So it might be the type of content that you produce on for one of those channels is slightly different. Facebook is more and more very video heavy, but there's also room for a lot of text on Facebook. So again, think about the different types of content you're producing for each channel. That's where the nuance and that's where the difference starts to come in. And then think about how people are using those channels again. So a great call to action on Facebook might be to share something, whereas for Instagram, it's potentially like, and for Instagram, again, you can't put links to, you can't, you tend to, they don't allow you to put links in your posts directly to either your website or fundraising pages, whereas Facebook does do that. And there's there's the Facebook donate, there's also Instagram donate, but there's slight differences in what the platforms actually allow you to do, which will influence how you use them. Yeah. Brilliant. So we're at 5 on the dot. So I'll wrap up there. And if you have any follow-up questions, I'll share those couple of resources that I've mentioned with you. Also, make sure to share the recording and the slides with you as well. But yeah, please don't hesitate to get in touch if you do have any questions. But yeah, once again, thank you very much for joining me. I hope you find it useful. And yeah, please get in touch if you have any further questions off the back of what I share with you. Brilliant.